And welcome in, everyone. Welcome in. Sorry about the delays, but we're live now. And I was just getting things ready to talk about the transfer portal because that requires research. I didn't want to be unresearched. I'd rather be late than talk about players that I have like no idea who they are, or talking about just a lot of different things. I would rather be prepared. So we're prepared now. There is a lot of things to talk about today, not just from the portal, but also from our previews, our semifinal previews. So I do want to start off with those, but before we begin, everyone, welcome in. Make sure to subscribe, make sure to like the video, make sure to hit the notification bell. Also, make sure to be active in the live chat. Any super chats that are sent in, we will pause in between those videos, in between the topics during the intermissions to respond to those super chats. I'm super excited to talk about these previews. I really am, because we have stuff that we want to get to, tomorrow and Wednesday. It's going to be a busy few days. Thursday, we're only going to be discussing, well, the College Football Playoff semifinal, the Fiesta Bowl, because it's actually it's my last first day of university on Thursday. After that, I will be able to have graduated and get my degree. So that'll just be a, pretty easy, pretty free day. Friday, we may or may not go live depending on how much transfer portal business there is, depending on how much topics I want to discuss. But more likely than not, we will just be, doing the live show for Oregon, Indiana, which that is going to be the main course for today. I think pretty unsurprisingly because of how big of a matchup that is. But we're going to start off talking about the Fiesta Bowl between Miami and the Ole Miss Rebels. That's what we're going to start off talking about today. Miami and Ole Miss. Both of these games are pretty close when it comes to a, point spread and betting odds perspective. And I think that both should be pretty entertaining games, but there is a way that I am leaning for both matchups that I want to discuss. Miami versus Ole Miss face off in the Fiesta Bowl. The 2026 College Football Playoff semifinal at the Fiesta Bowl kicks off this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be I believe, 4:30 p.m. local kickoff in Glendale, Arizona at the Fiesta Bowl. We got a 12-2 Miami, who did not make the ACC championship game. I know several people probably assume that because they're in the playoffs. They're the only ACC team in the playoffs. Duke won 9 games. They won the Sun Bowl, the ACC title. They did not make it to the playoffs. But Miami, being the best team in the ACC, and they probably should have figured out the tiebreakers to the ACC to let Miami into the ACC championship game. They're the Atlantic Coast Conference representative here, having beaten Ohio State by a score of 24-14 in the quarterfinal game, the first of them, that being the Cotton Bowl, and then beating Texas A&M 10-3 in the first round. And then we have Ole Miss here, 13-1, not the SEC champion. The only conference champion and only conference championship week participant that is still alive in the playoffs is Indiana, and we'll be talking about them shortly. Mississippi, with a 13-1 record, they beat Georgia in the rematch in the Sugar Bowl. They crushed Tulane in the first round. They won 11 regular season games, with their only loss coming to Georgia. And I just gotta, sit here and reminisce for, a second, or think about for a second, how many people predicted this matchup in the semifinals? If you did, tell us down below, because I certainly did not. I thought from the minute this bracket was released, that this would be a Georgia versus Ohio State matchup. And I thought that was not exactly a lock, but a very likely and the most likely semifinal matchup in the Fiesta Bowl. Alas, neither of those teams made it, as Ole Miss beat Georgia, and obviously Miami beat Ohio State. Diving into some of the analytics here, Miami is favored by 3.5 points. Line bounced in between 3.5 and 2.5 at multiple different books. And the odds say this game should be close. I mean, per FPI, this is a matchup between the 7th best team and the 12th best team. Per game control, it's between the 6th and 10th best, talking about Miami's analytics first, then Ole Miss's when we reference those two numbers. The 8th most efficient team with Miami, 15th most efficient with Ole Miss. Ole Miss is 11th in FEI, Miami is 6th, and Miami's 8th in S&P+. Ole Miss is 5th. Per FPI, Miami is given a 55.6% chance to win this game, with the 19th most efficient offense, 6th most efficient defense. Ole Miss has the 7th most efficient offense and the 53rd most efficient defense. Neither team is particularly all that exciting or ecstatic at special teams. And observing some points per play metrics and numbers here, you'll find that these teams are opposites in a lot of ways. You have Carson Beck at quarterback for Miami, who's really a system guy, is excellent at checkdowns, can make some NFL throws, but ultimately is a really system quarterback in both the good ways and the bad ways, and both a floor that can be extremely high when he's properly positioned, a floor that can also be very low if things are out of whack, and a ceiling that just is capped to a certain degree. Trinidad Chambliss is a bit more limitless. He's a bit more rogue, operates within the system well and outside the system well. He is a game changer at quarterback, an X factor there, and he leads the best offense in this matchup. Ole Miss scores 0.494 points per play. However, their defense allows 0.323 points per play. It showed improvement against Georgia. Georgia, we know, has had a litany of issues this year. I famously, at least on my channel, not on the internet, but I'd like to think so famously, said that Ole Miss didn't really have a chance against Georgia. How foolish was I? They certainly had a chance. They won. They actually won the line of scrimmage in that game with Will Eccles and Princewell Unmanmalin and Xavier Harris and Suntarine Perkins, really kind of messing with a Georgia offensive line that at times looked like was going to take over, but never did. And especially in that second half, they clamped Georgia's offense down the best they could and pulled away for a 39-34 win. Miami's defense is 4th in points per play allowed, only allowing 0.280, and they're 27th in points per play, averaging 0.459. The edge to Miami's offense that points per play may not show is they do a very good job, an excellent job at keeping things on schedule and not giving up tackles for loss, not surrendering sacks, of making sure they're on a 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6, not a 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12th, 3rd and 15th, 3rd and 20th. They are not explosive at all. That's why the points per play is so low, but they do a very good job at staying on schedule and kind of suffocating their opponents, if that is the appropriate term. I want to go back to the quarterback matchup before we continue here. So I mentioned earlier that Carson Beck can be check down Charlie, which is true. He can also be Timmy from South Park, where he throws several interceptions and Miami is held to single digits or low teens. He can make some accurate NFL throws. We've seen this in the playoffs, by the way. Against A&M right before halftime, he had a critical throw on a 3rd and very long, like 3rd and 11, that was caught, and it was the perfect throw. Miami's kicker, missed the kick before the half, but it was a great throw. He did a good job in the wind without routes in that game, and against Ohio State, he didn't throw any interceptions, didn't really make any mistakes, and if Carson Beck is check down Charlie, and you let him be that, and he can sprinkle in some of those high-level throws there, he can keep an offense moving, and he can do everything Mario Cristobal and Shannon Dawson want him to do and ask of him, which is keep the clock running, rest our defense, score some points, just enough points to win. He actually has more passing touchdowns than Trinidad Chambliss, though far more interceptions. His passer rating is slightly higher. His QBR is slightly lower. Both have a high completion percentage, but Beck is 2nd in completion percentage, completing 74.4% of his passes. and they both have over 3,300 passing yards. These are some of the better quarterbacks left in college football. Both top 10 in QBR, top 15 in passer rating. They are top 10 in a variety of other categories, or top 15 there. Chambliss is a quarterback who can put the team on his back. We did see this against Georgia. I'm not saying Georgia in that game was the better overall team. Power ratings would still tell you, I think, with an exception or two like S&P Plus, that Georgia is the better overall team in ratings. But on that day, Ole Miss overall was better. Like, Chambliss was a huge part of it, yes, but Stockton for Georgia was good in that game too. Ole Miss, on top of being better than Georgia at quarterback, was also superior on the offensive and defensive line, on top of being better at receiver and having fewer coverage busts in the secondary. I think the only thing Georgia was better at that day was probably tackling, and that on top of the defensive touchdown is what kept this game close. Chambliss, if he has another game like he did against Georgia, it's very hard to have a performance like that back to back. But he could get a Miami defense that does give up explosives on both the ground and through the air, and it's helpful to Ole Miss to also have Kawan Lacey as well. So it's very interesting. Ole Miss is good at preventing explosive plays. Rushing defense stepped up against Georgia, but it hasn't really stepped up all year, and they will give you space to make pass attempts. It does feel like, to me, that both offenses match up well against both defenses and what they want to do. But there is this part to Miami's defense where, is their defensive front, is their defensive line great enough to completely neutralize what Ole Miss wants to do and prevent those explosive plays? It's going to be up to Ahmed Moten Sr. at D-tackle, for edges Ruben Bain Jr. and Akeem Mesidor, and nickel Keontae Scott to put a stop to that. Mesidor and Bain right now have 135 pressures through 14 games. Combined, they almost average 10 pressures per game. They did so well against Ohio State, their PFF grades stayed about the same or increased, which is crazy to do against an opponent the caliber of the Buckeyes. Ahmad Moten and David Blay and Justin Scott in the interior of that Miami defensive line has performed better than many expected entering the season. Also pay attention to Muhammad Toure at linebacker, who is their best backer there. Keontae Scott just has a knack for making impact plays on the line of scrimmage as a defensive back. Whether it was the pick six against Ohio State, whether it was a few sacks against Marcel Reed and tackles for loss against Texas A&M, he has been such a critical addition to Miami this year. And then the only offensive player that I think, outside of Carson Beck and the offensive linemen, so Markel Bell, James Brockermeyer, Francis Mauigoa, Inez Cooper, Matthew McCoy, is Malachi Toney. He has over 1,000 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. Ohio State did limit him, yes, but I do believe Miami moved him around as a decoy in that game to open up routes for, say, Mark Fletcher or CJ Daniels or Keelan Marion. He is useful beyond just being wide receiver one, that you can run him as a running back. He's an effective blocker, an effective return specialist, also can be an effective decoy. How Miami utilizes these players is critical, because they should be able to run okay on Ole Miss, but can they get open on an Ole Miss secondary that's pretty good? And if they do, Malachi Toney is probably involved. And that defensive line with Keontae Scott the nickel, what do they do against an offense that really thrives on explosives? But if you can contain Chambliss well enough and prevent him from evading your pass rush, which is way better than Georgia's. Georgia's pass rush, it seemed, improved throughout the year. I'm beginning to think that that was probably more schematic on the Georgia staff, because it is very hard for players to make major leaps throughout the year. There are exceptions here and there, and I do think Georgia made some leaps as a team and as players, but a lot of that was probably, staffing, and Ole Miss just had the quarterback and the offense to kind of say, wait, hold on, no, your defense isn't top 10. It's not top 15. It's good. It's better than it was earlier in the year, but we can bust some things open here, and they did. I don't know if that's as realistic to predict against a Miami defense that has been better than Georgia's all season long. But if there is an offense to break down Miami's defense from a structural perspective, not a physical angle, but a structural angle, it is this Ole Miss offense that I think does a very good job operating outside of structure. We already talked about Chambliss, so we're not going to bring him up here again. But Kawan Lacey is 1,463 yards and 23 touchdowns on the ground. A big part of his success is breaking through first contact. That's what he's good at. He does not have a All-American offensive line in front of him. He does not have an NFL offensive line in front of him. Ole Miss has the worst offensive line remaining in the playoffs. Miami, Indiana, and Oregon all have a claim to be elite in their own right. Miami and Oregon are better size than Indiana is. Indiana probably has the best film on tape as an offensive line. Ole Miss has the worst by quite a bit. Lacey is the best running back remaining in the playoffs, though, by quite a bit. He's better than Mark Fletcher. He's better than Roman Hemby. He is better than Noah Whittington and any of the other rotational players in those rooms. He is running back one remaining in the playoffs. He does a great job breaking contact, knows when to accelerate, when to decelerate. It's a good thing Ole Miss won, and even though he fumbled and had that injured shoulder, he still played well. Hopefully he can rest up and play even stronger and have a better game here against Miami. DeJon Stribling is their top receiver with 734 receiving yards. I am anxious to see how, whether it's O.J. Frederic or whether it is, Keontae Scott or Zechariah Poyser, who covers him, who covers also Trey Wallace and Caden Lee, and also the tight end for Ole Miss. He's a lethal tight end. The defensive line is also another key piece because I think Miami will want to run it. I know Mario Cristobal said that Ole Miss is the best team they're facing for the rest of the playoffs to pay respects to them. However, one area where Ole Miss is not better than Ohio State is the defensive front. And Miami ran okay against A&M, really good against A&M once they got a consistent rhythm going. And then they ran well against Ohio State, factoring with how good that defensive front is. So in theory, they should run for 6 or 7 yards per carry here if you just look at the analytics. But Ole Miss stepped up on ground defense in their last game. So what pushes the recent history with Ole Miss or their resume for the entire season prior to that game where they were getting gashed on the ground? Looking at the head coaches, Pete Golding is only in his third game as the Ole Miss head coach. He's 2-0. He actually has a positive record against Kirby Smart, not just as a head coach, that would be obvious, but also when you factor in his time as a defensive coordinator. He has won multiple championships, SEC, national, and in playoff games with Nick Saban, and now has won some playoff games with a roster that was, built by Lane Kiffin. He's taken it over, made some upgrades there. Mario Cristobal's an elite recruiter and program builder. While his games have not been managed ideally, that drive entering the half, playing Ohio State where they're throwing it on 3rd and 20 instead of trying to run it up the middle to burn some time, maybe kick a field goal to make it 17-0, and their strategy in game against A&M where they weren't running it a whole lot. Some of that stuff is questionable, but they've brought the right mentality. They're mentally and physically tough, and that Ohio State game plan was ridiculously good. Like, send pressure, send blitzes, time the snap count, get after Sand and make him uncomfortable first and foremost, and offensively running the football, taking what you're given, and being aggressive on 4th down. That was an elite strategy to beat Ohio State, and really the biggest reason why Miami won that game. Game and Paper is a very useful website that gives a lot of different analytics from EPA, success rate, yards per play, yards per play margin, available yards, all that different good stuff. I mentioned earlier how Miami's defense is much better than Georgia's, and Miami's defense does have a shot to very much limit this Ole Miss offense. You look at the spider chart over on the left-hand side of your screen, and Miami's defense is equal to or better than Ole Miss's offense at pretty much everything, and they're significantly better than them at line yards and stuff percentage. Stuff percentage is, run stoppage, basically. In theory, they should be able to limit Ole Miss's offense in a variety of ways. On a down-per-down basis, Miami should win against Ole Miss and maybe even destroy the offense. But then you look at the explosive play percentage and the rush explosiveness and the pass explosiveness. And Ole Miss has a massive edge in both of those categories. So, on one hand, Miami defensively should be able to possibly script Ole Miss out of the game if they can run the ball and if they can do well on defense. On another hand, it really feels like if they just have one coverage assignment wrong, or Kejuan Lacey breaks one tackle, or Ruben Bain Jr. or Akeem Mesidor dive a little bit too early and Chambliss escapes, it could feel like while Ole Miss loses the down-per-down battle, they could win the war by having several big touchdown plays or big plays that get them within scoring distance or get them in the end zone. You look at Miami's offense versus Ole Miss's defense, and on one hand, yeah, when it comes to preventing havoc plays versus generating havoc plays, Miami dominates there. Miami shouldn't really turn over the football here all that much. They shouldn't give up many sacks or TFLs. Miami has way better line yards. Ole Miss does not stuff the run usually. And Miami functions better on late downs and third down than Ole Miss does. But the one area where Ole Miss might have an edge in is the fact that Miami does not generate a ton of explosive passing attempts or pass plays, and Ole Miss is even better at stopping those. Ole Miss's defense is good at limiting explosive plays, and their pass defense on paper, and I would also say to a limited degree in practice, is, you know what? It's respectable. So if Carson Beck has an off night here, and you throw some of the turnover metrics where Miami's pretty good out the window because he has a bad game, and Ole Miss is able to create these big plays consistently, which analytics say all of these things are sustainable. This is possible. They'll win. If that's how this game goes, then Ole Miss wins here. If not, then Miami probably emerges as the victor, as they are the more balanced team, the more talented team at a variety of positions, and the deeper team. It's reflected in some of the net, EPA per play with, offense, defense, the success rates on, both sides of the football, and also the fact that Miami usually gets a much better field position than Ole Miss. Ole Miss is the inferior team here. Doesn't mean they can't win. Doesn't mean they won't win. Sharps were on Ole Miss pretty early when the line released at Miami -3.5. Then he got major buyback by Sharps at Miami -2.5. The line's back up to 3.5. So there is some confidence on the Miami side here, but not a whole lot. It's pretty easy to lose as a 3.5 point favorite. Very doable. And one thing Ole Miss is better at is stopping explosive plays and generating them. And in an indoor facility, when your quarterback is as red hot as he's been and you have a running back that is awesome and breaks tackles, you have as good of a chance as anyone at generating those type of plays against a defense that allows them. Some keys to the game before we get to my prediction. Lines of scrimmage, rush offense, big plays, pass rush, and quarterback contain. Quarterback contain mostly goes for Trinidad Chambliss, but Carson Beck also had a few key scrambles against Ohio State that extended drives. If he is able to do that against Miami and chew more clock, keep Chambliss off the field, it's going to be hard for Miami to win this game and dictate the pace. Big plays, which offense generates more, it's likely going to be Ole Miss, but Miami has some athleticism to them, and they're not going to be facing nearly as good of a defense as they did Ohio State, nor as good of a defense as they faced against Texas A&M. This profiles as probably a higher scoring game for both parties compared to Miami's previous games. It's probably profiles more up the alley of Georgia Ole Miss in a sense, with Georgia's offense decreasing and their defense playing more at the level of their, say, 2022 defense, if that makes any sense. And rush offense as well. Lacey could do more than Miami's O-line and win Ole Miss the rushing battle there. And that would be pretty big for the Rebels. In thinking about this game, I'm not really confident either way. I'm not really confident for any of these semifinal matchups, but I will say I'm probably a little bit more confident in my Peach Bowl prediction than my Fiesta Bowl prediction. I think that Miami is the better staff and overall team, and that they do have an edge in run defense and pass rush here. But I also think Ole Miss has a massive edge in pass offense. I think they will be able to pass effectively when Miami does not get immediate pressure on the Hurricane defense. And even if Miami gets immediate pressure, if they don't get home, I still think Ole Miss will be able to move the football. It is key here that Miami gets home and they have several long drives where they can dictate the pace here and maintain a lead. It's close, very close. I have respect for both teams, for both coaches, and I think either could win this game. And at this point, with how crazy this has been, either at least have a slim chance to win it all. I think Miami probably has a little bit better of a chance than that. I'm going with Miami to win and cover. I think they're going to win by more than 3, so 4 or more. They'll cover the 3.5. I just think they have too much power and speed on the lines of scrimmage and on defense in general to lose this game. I think they will do a better job defending what Ole Miss has offered than any defense Ole Miss has faced throughout the year. This is a better defense than Oklahoma's. It's a better defense than Georgia's. It's better than any defense Ole Miss has played all season. And this offense is better than Oklahoma's, which was able to move the football in Ole Miss. Their lines of scrimmage are better than Georgia. And I think that, they're the better team here. Miami is. And it's hard to pick against the better team, especially this late in the year when we've already seen upsets. These teams have played 14 games. I really love what Miami has here. I also love what Ole Miss has in passing offense and at quarterback. So I would not be shocked if I'm wrong and Ole Miss ends up winning and covering. But I'm going to go with Miami because I think they're a more proven team. I think they're a better team. I think you're going to see that Ole Miss's line of scrimmage improvements against Georgia were real, but Miami is just that much better on the defensive line and offensive line than the Georgia Bulldogs. I think you're going to see that for sure. Indiana, Oregon is I would say, totally different beast. I think both of these teams are the best teams remaining in the playoffs for sure. I like how do I put it here? I like what I have seen out of both teams more than what I've seen out of Miami and Indiana. I really do. I think the biggest edge for Oregon is it's hard to beat a good team twice. Very hard. And Dante Moore entered this year with less experience than Fernando Mendoza. And through several games, you would assume, hopefully, that he has caught up somewhat. But I also believe what benefits Indiana here is their coordinators are fully focused on this game. They're not elsewhere. Oregon's coordinators are. And as much as Oregon is more talented than Indiana from a recruiting angle, I think if you look at the starters of this team, like older starters who will be going to the pros, this draft, I think that Indiana matches up well with Oregon there. And if they can stay healthy in this game, I like their starting roster better. I do. Even with the injury to Daly. Is it by this big margin? No. Is there like a ton of points that separate these teams? No, I think Indiana's probably the, better team by anywhere from 2 to 4 points, I would assume. And that explains why sharps are on Oregon here in betting, is because, the most aggressively pro Indiana ratings have IU like as a 4-point favorite, and the line opened up at 4.5. So just some interesting things to keep in mind there. Let me see how the chat's going. Oh, we have 79 concurrent viewers. Okay. I don't want to leave this chat then. I don't want to leave you guys hanging. So I'm going to answer this super chat here. And then we are going to we're going to talk about this game. Okay, so I'm not a betting expert, but I like to talk about lines because talking about things, if you're talking to good people and they can correct you, and I have some good people in my pocket, that's, discussing things and, talking about them and having them on your mind and learning about them is the only way to get better. And I have some trusted people who know what sports books think in my pocket. Are the sharps on Miami or Ole Miss? Asks George Hoyos 4931. Thank you for the $2 super chat, by the way. From what I can tell, I think sharps are on Miami. From where the opening line was, I think actually, let me correct myself here. I think sharps like Miami -3. What we have seen, we saw opening up immediately, there was action hammering. And I mean hammering. Like there was immediate action on Miami -3.5 when the line opened up to go down to 2.5. And then the following day or two, Miami went back to 3.5. And now it just changed live as I'm answering this. But Miami for a minute on FanDuel was at -3.5 plus 100 juice, which meant if there was any more money that came in on Ole Miss, it would have flipped right down to Miami -2.5. So I think the sharps like Miami -3 here. They don't like it higher. They don't like it lower. They see value on either side. I don't know if this is the case with Oregon, Indiana, but it feels like it's the case where with the Ducks and the Hoosiers, the sharps like it at Indiana -4. If it's anywhere above that, they buy on Oregon. And if it's anywhere below that, they hold steady at 3.5 or buy in on Indiana, is what I'm seeing there. That's where the lines have flipped at. It's been -3.5 or -4.5 for Indiana, Oregon, and it keeps bouncing back. And it's also been that way for Miami, Ole Miss, except for between 2.5 and 3.5 for Miami. Let me check ESPN real quick because they use DraftKings. I mean, they canceled ESPN Bet probably because a lot of people didn't use it, which I understand. Like ESPN sucks. Half the reason I look at it is because of FPI. Oh yeah. Indiana's at 3.5 per DraftKings. It was at 4 opening up there. The juice is weighed towards Indiana at 3.5. Which means they're looking. Oh wow, it's -3 for DraftKings for Miami. It's heavily juiced to Miami, so that might trickle up to 3.5. I think those lines are comfortable spots, honestly. For sharp bettors is 4 for Indiana, Oregon, and for Miami and Ole Miss, it's 3. Anything on a side of that's going to be attempted to be hammered one way or the other. So thank you for that. Sam, you brought up the coordinators and their distractions versus Indiana, who has 0. I think this is huge. They have a portal to contend with. I do think that has an impact. I do. I think that has a that has probably more of an impact than the majority of people thinking Indiana's going to win. Like on one hand, you could say of outside factors, the outside noise favors Oregon because fewer people are picking them, so that could give a motivating factor. The outside factor that favors Indiana is their coordinators are coming back. They've already been extended. They also already have 8 transfer portal commits, so they probably won't have to focus on getting all that more, at least this week. They already got like 3 defensive ends, 2 safeties, a running back, a quarterback, Nick Marsh at receiver. Really, their only critical need that they must get someone in the portal for is probably 1 or 2 great offensive linemen and maybe like another depth piece or so. But I imagine they're already working on that. Oregon just has a punter committed, and Tosh Lupoy, their defensive coordinator, future head coach at Cal, Will Stein, their offensive coordinator, future head coach at Kentucky. They're having to put together portal classes for their schools, and Lanning and the remaining staff having to put together portal classes for Oregon. So tricky times indeed. That is something that definitely favors the Indiana. And thank you, Chuck, for being a member, by the way. Really appreciate that. Um, Dante Moore out dueling Mendoza, pissed off Ohioan. That's possible. That's Oregon's path to victory. I think that Indiana is fundamentally sound enough, healthy enough, and good enough to where, how do I put this? Oregon's going to have to play better than IU to beat them. And that's not like that's a no duh. I think these teams are even enough to where whoever plays better wins. But I've seen Indiana play more clean and consistent and cohesive football than I have Oregon. I have. They're more balanced. They're more multiple. So Indiana, we know what we're getting with IU. We don't quite know if they're going to play to their ceiling or if they're just going to play well, but they're going to play in that range. Oregon offensively against Tech got manhandled. Let's just get into the preview. I'll tell you guys. We don't need to. I don't need to talk about this outside of the preview. So let's get to that. Let's just talk about the preview in this game. Oh, this is incredible. We have the mother of all rematches taking place in the Peach Bowl. The number 1 overall seed and the only remaining conference champion in the playoff, the number 1 Indiana Hoosiers at 14-0, take on, and technically host as they're the higher seed, the 5th overall 13-1 Oregon Ducks. Oregon's only loss, 20-30 at home, Indiana, in the regular season. These teams, of course, have changed a little bit since then. Oregon, after this game, had a lot of lingering injuries that they've mostly recovered from, I believe. Indiana, after this game, I think has adapted some in the fact that they no longer have Stephen Daly or Kellen Wyatt. They've had to change some things up and introduce some new players defensively. I also believe they've done a better job limiting explosive plays since this game, where Oregon had 2, one on defense, one on offense, the pick 6, and the long about 40-yard Malik Benson touchdown. So both teams have adapted. I think both have improved from where they were at that point in the year. And look, these are 2 of the future powerhouses in college football. By powerhouse, I don't mean whatever Nick Saban had at Alabama. Those days are long gone. But they're going to be towards the top of the sport. And you see that with Oregon's recruiting and development. You see that with Indiana's recruiting and development, and also what they're doing in the portal right now, what they have done in the portal before. Oregon, very familiar with that as they've been successful in the portal under head coach Dan Lanning. Indiana's favored by anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5 or 4, depending on what book you look at. The Hoosiers are favored in this game by multiple ratings. I do know some people who think that this is a wrong team favored situation. I have a lot of people I respect who are on Oregon. I have people I respect who are on Indiana. We've done a pretty good job picking games this year, and I'm proud to say that with both of these teams, Oregon and Indiana, we were very high on them at the beginning of the year. Beginning of the year, I had Oregon going 11-1 and reaching the Big Ten championship game again. At some point in the preseason, I had Indiana going 11-1 and reaching the Big Ten championship game again. Kind of flip-flop between whether they would play Penn State, and in some cases I even thought maybe they'll play each other. And preseason, we had Indiana earning 10 or 11 wins. We had Oregon winning 10 or 11 games. And we viewed both as playoff contenders. We viewed both of them as, I would say, top 8, top 7 teams. And very quickly, by really the end of September, I viewed both as top 5 when Oregon, beat Penn State, and Indiana just absolutely mollywopped and crushed Illinois, was able to survive on the road against Iowa. I've been high on both of these teams. I've picked both of these teams to win the vast majority of their games. I've been right in a lot of spots about these teams. We were on Oregon all year to be this team that if they reached the playoffs, they could win it all. A lot of people said they couldn't win it all. Well, they were wrong, and most of them didn't do their research. I was early in saying that I thought Indiana could win it all. And people have said no and no and no. They're now the national title favorite by quite a bit. So In some instances, or some cases, I'd like to call this game the College Football with Sam Bowl, because I like both these fan bases, love both these teams, the direction they're going in. Also love the Ole Miss and Miami fan base and think that Ole Miss has been a nice surprise and Miami's heading in the right direction. But both of these teams I do have an affinity for. I'm not going to lie. An objective affinity, of course, an admiration for them. Let's look at the first game between these two. It was 30-20. Took place on October 11th. Both teams had a bye after Indiana played Iowa and Oregon played Penn State. Indiana won the turnover battle, though Oregon was actually winning the turnover battle for much of the game. They forced the first turnover of the game, the pick six. Indiana outgained Oregon 23 first downs to 14. Both teams were pretty even in penalties. Indiana nearly doubled up Oregon in third down conversions. Oregon had 3 fourth down conversions. Indiana had 6 sacks to 1. Indiana led in TOP. Indiana had about the same amount of rushing yards. Both teams ran pretty similarly. Oregon had more explosive runs. Indiana was more consistent in power rushing. And Indiana had the better passing offense, more disciplined quarterback. I would say better lines of scrimmage, just slightly better, a little bit everywhere. That combined with Oregon's home field advantage and having some playmakers to make a big play on offense and defense created this final score of 30-20. The better team on that day won. I think the better team at that moment won. Now, looking at it, I will personally ascribe to thinking that Indiana is the better team here. There are people I respect, though, who think Oregon is better. Like a guy I really respect who loves Oregon here. And I've referenced his channel before. You guys might know who he is. I know, very cryptic, but he has his own video to make about it. I might even link it on my own channel to bring it up. Because I think Oregon can win here. I think Indiana can win here. I don't think that Indiana has a 67% chance to win this game, and Oregon only has a 33% chance. It's probably underrating Oregon a bit. I'd probably peg this more at 65-35 or 60-40 edge for the Hoosiers, looking at analytics or if I had to make a personal power rating. Indiana's first in FEI, S&P Plus, FPI, and efficiency. They were fourth in game control. Oregon is third in FPI and S&P Plus, second in FEI, second in game control, fourth in efficiency. FEI after the quarterfinal games updated, and I was so pleasant to see that Indiana and Oregon were the top 2 teams in the entire country left in the playoff. Both passed Ohio State. Indiana was already ahead of Ohio State for much of the year in FEI, but Oregon passed them. And that was so satisfying to see, because I have had kind of an inkling since I think it was mid-October, early November, that Indiana might be number 1, but Oregon could also be number 1 if they got healthy. And Indiana and Oregon needed to get healthy in November. It was a big part of the reason why I didn't put them ahead of Ohio State at the time, even though I thought when healthy they could be better. Now looking at it, well, they are. They have only 1 loss combined to their name. One of Oregon's losses to Indiana. I think that these are the 2 best teams in the country, honestly. They are excellent on defense, at tackling, on offense. Their lines of scrimmage are top in America. When you look at efficiencies, Oregon is the 4th best offense and the 5th best defense. They have the 5th best defense, the Ducks do, and Indiana is the 3rd best defense per efficiency. One area where I think there is a definite advantage to one team could be special teams for Indiana when looking at efficiency. Though I will say that Atticus Sappington, I know he missed a pretty short kick against Texas Tech. I think he's been pretty good this year. I think Sappington's been a good kicker. James Ferguson Reynolds has been a good punter. The Ducks are 6th in points per play, 7th in points per play allowed. Indiana's 4th in points per play and 3rd in points per play allowed. Oregon does a better job at yards per play margin because they're more explosive. Indiana is more consistent, and I think that both teams and both fan bases could buy into that. It's really interesting, though, because through 14 games, the spread's Indiana minus 3.5 or 4.5. And this is a rematch. This game could totally go based on what we know, or it could be totally out of left field, or somewhat out of left field, or somewhere in between, because they're familiar with each other and they know a little bit about what each other wants to do. And that can sometimes create, a change in game plan, adaptations. You might be focused too much on the first game, and therefore you overlook the changes that both teams have made throughout the season. It's going to be a fascinating matchup and probably a contender for the game of the year in college football. One thing that will decide this game, Indiana's the favorite. They won the first game, and they did it with decisively better quarterback play. That's why they won the first game. There was a lot that was equal and a lot that went Indiana's way, but Oregon did some things in that game that were good. They, for example, had the pick six. They had the big bomb. They were able to run it. They were able to run it okay. They either had a good amount of success getting 5 or 6 yards, or they gave up a TFL. That was pretty much how their run game was. So better at long runs than IU, worse at short runs. And at the end of the day, it was just Moore taking 6 sacks and throwing kind of 2 panicky interceptions at the end of the day, where Mendoza only took a sack and only had 1 turnover, and Mendoza was better at running the football, and that's why Indiana won. Now, at the end of the year, Mendoza is first in yards per pass attempt, averaging 9.6. He's first in touchdowns thrown with 36. He only has thrown 6 interceptions. He is first in passer rating and second in QBR. Moore is 8th and 13th in those categories. Moore has 28 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He's averaging 8.8 yards per attempt. He has a 72.9 completion percentage. Mendoza has a 72.3. Both have over 3,100 passing yards. Mendoza just has 108 fewer passing yards than Dante Moore, in part because he has 41 fewer attempts and 32 fewer completions. These quarterbacks are very similar. Both have a strong arm. Both can zip it. Both have a knack to be able to take off and be utilized in the ground game. Both sometimes take unnecessary sacks, for sure. They also can make some wow throws and are very gutsy with the football and have a great command of their offense. Both are viewed as round 1, pick 1 right now in the upcoming NFL draft, and will either go to the Raiders or the Jets if both declare at this point. So that's what I'm looking at here is quarterback. I know it's a cliche. It's because it's true. Quarterback often determines, the winner if a lot of other things are equal, and a lot of other things are pretty close here. The reason Oregon lost the first time, they had home field advantage. Indiana had to deal with the travel, and Oregon at the time and still now had a recruiting edge. So why did Oregon lose? Well, a big part of it was because Mendoza did a better job of reading and reacting to Oregon's defense than Moore did to Indiana's, on top of some other things, like I would say Indiana probably tackled better in that game. Those things might be permanent. Like you may see that come up again here, where Mendoza's the better field general and Indiana tackles better. But that also could have been a single game thing, and some of those issues are certainly correctable, or you can limit their negative impacts while trying to maximize a positive impact or advantage in another way. And the elite staffs will do this, and I think both of these staffs are fantastic. Starting off with Oregon, since they're the visitor here technically as the lower seed, their key players are going to be all across the field defensively. Evan Stewart, I think, is a key player here just because I think Oregon in a game like this is going to need all the help they can at wide receiver. They didn't need it quite as much against Texas Tech, but they're going to be dealing with a better defense overall, and particularly a better backfield than what Tech has. Tech has a better D-line than what Indiana has to offer up, especially in pass rush. IU probably overall at every front is better at run defense, and they're better at pass defense in the secondary, maybe at linebacker too. But the pass rush that Texas Tech provided is something that I don't think anyone can match that. And what they were able to do from a havoc standpoint in creating TFLs and getting leverage against that Oregon O-line, that was crazy. Some of it was on Oregon's O-line. I do think at least a good chunk of that, though, is just the fact that you're playing Texas Tech. You're going to have to deal with that when you play Tech. And then you also got Isaiah World, speaking of the trenches for Oregon. So Tatum Tuioti, 37 pressures. And then Bryce Betcher has 84 tackles, and Dylan Thieneman has 63. Thieneman and Betcher are going to have to tackle perfectly here to maximize the chances at victory to earn a win. And Tuioti and Mateo Uyunglele are going to have to try to take over against these Indiana tackles. Indiana just has put on so much game film and has put on so many analytics to show that they can consistently move the football. And even if it's 3rd and long, and even if they're not running it perfectly, sometimes they can sidestep that briefly, and Mendoza can just do magical things with Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper Jr., and while Oregon has made some changes since the first round of this matchup, Indiana has too. They have had Charlie Becker emerge, and he is now a part of this offense. They can connect, and I'm not even going to exclude Riley Nowakowski, their tight end, from that conversation. So they need to be on point, not just with pass rush or tackling or hard hitting. They need all of those things. They have to play their A+ game here because Indiana is the best offense they've played all year. They faced them before. They're facing them again. And there's a chance that IU's going to play a better game offensively than they did in Autzen. They're not going to have to deal with the crowd noise anymore. Oregon had a lot of stemming in that game that set Indiana off and caused several 3rd and shorts to become 3rd and longs. If that doesn't happen, and that's on Indiana too for not dealing with it. Also, there's been the referees have said that should be, depending on certain things, be called offsides. If that doesn't happen, Indiana probably puts up more than 30 points. So on one hand, there is a scenario here with the emergence of Becker and no longer having to deal with that crowd. And Oregon's defense loves to utilize that crowd, as any defense does in an environment that loud. Ask Ohio State, ask Washington, who's particularly tough to play, especially against their defense on the road. They could have a better game here than they did the first time around. They could also have a worse game. And I think a lot of that doesn't just depend on Indiana, but there's two sides to the coin. It also depends on what game Oregon brings defensively. Offensively, and paying attention to the wide receivers, so obviously Gary Bryant, Malik Benson, Brycen Moore, all of whom played against Indiana the first time. And also that includes, tight ends. You got Kenyon Sadiq, and you got the backup tight end to him, Jamari Johnson. Johnson's playing more now than he was then. A little bit of a positive change for Oregon. But they're not as explosive or deep at wide receiver as, say, Ohio State was. They're probably not even as deep there as Alabama was. And Oregon did a pretty good job against both of those units, or Indiana did. I think Oregon probably would have too in some regards. If Evan Stewart comes back, I don't think it's the biggest impact here. He hasn't played all season long, and I think other factors like defensive play, line of scrimmage play, and quarterback play will determine more in this game than wide receiver play. But would it be helpful to have? Yes. Could it be just enough of an impact to tilt, say, a 3-point Indiana win into a 3-point Oregon win? Sure. And then for Isaiah World, and you can add Alex Harkey on here too, those tackles are big bodies. They have NFL potential. But on top of being big, they're not super quick. And Tech did expose that. Indiana does not have the front of Texas Tech, but they do have some speed. Bryant Haynes loves to come up with simulated pressures, loves to give you looks where you don't know where the blitzer's coming from. That doesn't just confuse the quarterback. That can confuse the offensive line. Those tackles need to be on their A game against this Indiana pass rush and defense. For the Hoosiers, with the absence of Stephen Daly, we need Nduke at edge and Michael Kamara at D-end to step up in pressure. On top of that, Tyreek Tucker up the middle will probably have to do some things against the run and against the pass. Aiden Fisher at linebacker and Elijah Hardy, you're going to have to tackle well. These guys are hard-hitting. They can run the football much better than Alabama can. They're just a better team overall on both sides of the ball than Alabama is, but especially offensively. And then D'Angelo Pons, who's been great all season long. Really the only guy who put yards on him was Jeremiah Smith. What does he do? He has 44 tackles and an 84.5 PFF grade. He's the best corner in America and probably the best corner in this game. So how does he match up against, whether it's Brycen Moore, whether it's Malik Benson, who does he match up against? And who is he better? Who is he better than? And does he beat his man? Elijah Surratt, Charlie Becker, and Omar Cooper Jr. are other players to pay attention to. Same with tackle Carter Smith, and whether it is tackle Khalil Benson for Indiana, or Indiana continues to move with one of their newer tackles, Adedemola Ajane. How do they hold up against Tatum Tuioti and Mateo Uyunglele? I want to give a shout out to Pat Coogan, center for Indiana, who won the MVP of the Rose Bowl. Indiana has a chance here with how good their interior O-line has played and how consistent their power running is, to where Oregon is really good up the middle. And they have a chance to set Indiana off with the shutting down their rushing attack and making the RPO really reliant on the pass. That could give them issues, the Hoosiers. Indiana also has the opportunity with what they have in between the tackles, running back, quarterback, that entire O-line, to be able to move the ball enough on an Oregon defense that does not generate tons of havoc plays. And I know they did it against Texas Tech. Tech has allowed gobs of havoc plays all season long. They are a far inferior offense to what Indiana runs. There is a disparity of tens and tens of tens between those two offenses, and also between those offensive lines. So that is going to be a very critical area for either side to win. Obviously, the lines of scrimmage. Taking a look at both of these coaches, Oregon's Dan Lanning has a 48-7 record in the FBS. Cignetti has a 44-6 record. So this is going to be an intense matchup. Both of these teams have at times had to do more with less. That's been Cignetti's entire mantra. Dan Lanning has built up his roster from where Cristobal left it and created, I think, one of the best rosters and teams in college football, one of the best programs. Cignetti took over Tom Allen's mess, and they are elite relative to this season. And there's a chance that Indiana gets better than this even in the future as they continue to recruit better, get better transfers, develop better, and invest more money into football. Lanning is an ace defensive mind and also an ace roster builder. I would expect him to change some things up defensively for this game, try to limit some of what Indiana wants to do. And I think that, look, he knows how to build a roster. He has NFL athletes everywhere. For Cignetti, he's also a great program builder. He builds rosters a bit differently than Lanning, but they also develop at a high level. And I think that his game planning and game management is pretty excellent. Lanning, I think, has a certain style of game that he wants to follow, and he will follow that. It's called be Dan Campbell in college football. Cignetti's is, I think, a little bit more balanced than that, a little bit more situational. There are pros and cons to both. Obviously, Cignetti won their only head-to-head. Lanning has a chance at revenge here, and Cignetti has a chance to, I think, win it all, as does Lanning. I think the winner of this game will win the national championship. I'm somewhat confident that I will be on Oregon or Indiana, not just to win, but to cover against Miami or Ole Miss, depending on who they play. Looking at some game on paper numbers here, Indiana's offense versus Oregon's defense is fascinating because this was a matchup that, as I mentioned earlier, you change a few things that I think are very correctable. So Alabama tried to stem a lot against Indiana, and Indiana didn't react to it. So they've corrected that. Indiana, I think, now probably has a better idea of how they want to run the football than they did then. Entering that game against Oregon, they had a lot of success running it. They've been punched in the mouth a few times in the offensive line, and I think have done a better job at power rushing recently than they had earlier in the year. When you look at these spider charts, one area where Oregon has an edge over Indiana is getting some expected points added on early downs and also passing the football well, and that can create explosives. But outside of those things, and Indiana's pretty close there, IU has pretty big advantages in stopping havoc plays against Oregon, creating them. They have a huge edge in late down success average third down distance, stuff percentage, and line yards. Some pretty big advantages there that go in the way of Indiana's offense. An offense that is well coordinated, is well coached. Oregon's defense, well coordinated, well coached too. Both have a lot of talent. And what helps Indiana here is that their only first round pick, like Oregon, they probably only have one first round pick right now too. We could see, I think Pons, depending on what happens, could be in that discussion. Probably one of Oregon's defensive linemen, more likely Mateo Uiagalelei, could be in that discussion. It's too deep at safety, I think, for Thieneman to be in that conversation, especially with Caleb Downs, for example. But it helps Indiana here. They have some edges on offense. Like, Oregon has some things they could beat Indiana at here, but Indiana has clear advantages on the offensive side of the ball, and it helps that a lot of these have to do with their offensive line, which is among the nation's best, and also has to do with their only first-round player on the team, from what we know of, like confirmed first-rounder Fernando Mendoza. That's the late down success rate. That's the average distance on third down. That also has to do with their offensive line. That's the line yards, the stuff percentage, the havoc rate. Indiana, I love what I see out of their offense in this potential rematch. There's also an opportunity for Oregon to limit their offense. But I will say, in making my first prediction in this game, I think Oregon has to score 20 here to win. If they score any less than that, there is no way they're winning this game. They have to get to 20. I will make my second prediction for Indiana here. And that prediction being that Indiana will not give up an explosive touchdown. I predicted Oregon to do so against Tech. They didn't generate any. I thought that based on the first matchup that maybe they could get some more explosives on IU. I don't really think so. But what I will also say in regards to Oregon is I believe that Oregon will have a chance to win the passing battle. And I think a big part of that is because of their explosive play percentage, especially through the air, and how it matches up with what Indiana's defense has done throughout the year, where they've given up explosive plays through the passing attack here or there. They do. It's their mantra. They either shut you down or they kind of give up an explosive here and there. That is an edge where Oregon, I think, clearly has over this Indiana defense. And a clear edge for Indiana here is, again, line yards and stuff percentage. Analytically, Indiana's run defense and offense are far more consistent than what Oregon has. Oregon's much more explosive in the rushing attack, and I would argue even in run defense in a positive way than IU is. Not by a huge margin on that part, though. But in terms of consistency and fundamental soundness, IU is better at consistently picking up needed 2, 3, or 4 yards than Oregon is. They're also better at, preventing opponents from getting anything on the line of scrimmage at all, where Oregon will consistently give up 3 to 4 yards per carry. And we saw this against, not early with Texas Tech. We saw that in the second half, where when Tech finally put together some drives, they were able to get some push, even though they were dominated on the O-line. They got better push up there than Oregon did, despite Oregon's offense being on the field all that time. So those are a few predictions I'm making right now before we conclude this preview, is that Indiana is not going to allow an explosive touchdown. Doesn't mean they won't allow an explosive play. That could happen. But a touchdown like the one they allowed to Malik Benson or to Hank Beatty early in the Illinois game, I don't think that'll happen. I also think that Oregon has to score 20 points to win. My prediction with Indiana here is I also think they have to score 20 points to win too. I think that Oregon, with Dante Moore improving and them getting the tight ends involved more, will probably put up more than 13 offensive points. Probably. I don't know about that, though. I think that IU can afford scoring less points and winning than Oregon can. I think if you're Oregon, you are probably more comfortable with this being an explosive type game. Indiana's more comfortable in a rock fight here, I think. But we're getting into a lot of hypotheticals here. So let's march on to the prediction. Indiana has an edge in EPA per play. They have an edge with it offensively. Defensively, Oregon actually allows less, and a lot of it has to do with explosives. Indiana throughout the year has given up more explosives than Oregon has. A lot of that's been corrected recently in the same way that I think Oregon's offense has corrected some of its, issues with Dante Moore taking sacks and not taking points. You saw some of that come up against Tech, but again, it's Tech's defense. That might be the best defense in college football. So could Indiana's, so could Ohio State's. Oregon's played pretty damn good too in the Orange Bowl. I think Oregon here has an offense that is more boom or bust than Indiana. Indiana's offense probably is the better unit. If I had to go on defense, who's the better unit? I would also go with Indiana there. But I will say, just to give you a peek into my brain, I've factored in talent and even recruiting stuff more than I did last year. It's helped me a lot this year. But we're also 14 games through, and the longer we go throughout the year, the more I just go with analytics, and recruiting rankings only come up if I see an issue with the team scaling or if they haven't proven it to me yet. Indiana's proven they can scale with the big boys. So if that's not your methodology, you might say Oregon's better on both sides of the football because they do have that recruiting talent edge. They do have a size edge there. I've seen Indiana through 14 games. They may as well, if they're mostly healthy, be as talented as these top teams they're competing with. They don't have the same depth. Don't get that mistaken. But they only have 2 injuries in Wyatt and Daly. And Daly is a big one. But they've dealt with those for over a month now. And they've figured out ways to coach around them. They've still figured out ways to get pressure, to do well in the ground. I think Indiana here is the slightly better team. They also have the better net field position. And while Oregon is the superior net EPA per drive, I think that, again, a lot of that comes down to explosives. I think that's going to be the thing here. Oregon's going to need to not necessarily be more explosive in the sense that they need like 2 explosive touchdown passes instead of the one they got beforehand. But they are going to need to be more successful on offense than they were in round 1 while limiting the potential success that Indiana's offense had in round 1. And I think, look, that both of these teams can do that here. The keys to this game tie right into that. It's going to be QB accuracy, not who's the better quarterback overall, who's just better on that given day. Who shows up and is better on Friday? If it's Mendoza, give me Indiana. If it's Dante Moore, give me Oregon. Who gets better wide receiver separation? It's interesting where like Oregon has ridiculous speed at receiver and DB, but Indiana's guys find a way to get open, and they got speed and they got length. Like they got Charlie Becker up there at 6'4". Pons is uber fast and probably the most athletic corner here. Not as big or prototypical as Brandon Finney, but more athletic right now, I would say, yeah. What about lines of scrimmage? Who wins the trenches on either side of the football? Looking at tackling, I think whoever tackles better also wins. And then fundamentals, limit mistakes, tackle well, participate in and hit hard on special teams. There's a lot at stake here. I think that this is the de facto national championship game. I'll go as far to say that. I think Miami could win. I think Ole Miss has a sliver of chance to win. But the majority of the pie chart that would tell you who has a shot to win it all would be taken up by Oregon and Indiana. So whoever wins this game will be favored in the national title. You can already see in look-ahead lines. What's my pick? What's my prediction? So this is tough. There's a part of me that's saying Oregon, but it flies in the face of much of my analysis. And it is me looking at 2 great teams. And when 2 great teams face off, you should not be 10 out of 10 confident that you're going to win. You shouldn't. And if you are, there's something wrong with your analysis. I'm probably at a 6 or 7 out of 10 confident that IU wins here because they're the better team. I think they're better coached. And I believe that their offense will be able to do as much against Oregon's defense as they did the first time around. I believe that. Oregon has improved, I think, on defense in some parts compared to earlier in the year. But so has Indiana. Indiana could have an edge in home field crowd here. And while that may not matter, it could also matter if certain things in the first game translate over, and we know that first time around home field advantage helped Oregon. I'm actually not factoring that into my prediction all that much. I'm not factoring in crowd noise affecting Oregon. I'm treating this more as a true neutral field game. I don't think either team will have trouble with the travel. I don't think either team will have really trouble at all. I think both will play well. I'm just of the belief that Indiana is the better team here. That's my analysis. That's what the power ratings say. That's what the efficiency ratings say. It's honestly what the film says. Now, I respect you if you think Oregon's the better team and this is a wrong team favored situation. I do. Oregon could be peaking at the right time. Oregon does have more recruiting talent. Oregon did some things well in the first game where if they clean up some of those sacks and aren't as off schedule, they were getting more explosive runs in that game. So if they pass protect well, there's a chance that they just put together that much more sustainable offense. There's also a chance that Indiana's able to, improve in stopping the explosive runs, and they're better in the backfield now than they were then. I think that I have to go with the better staff here and what I think is the slightly better team. So I'm picking Indiana to win. I'm picking them to cover. But I want to give a fair warning here. Do not be shocked at all if Oregon wins, and don't come on. I mean, you have permission to comment that I was wrong, of course. Don't come in here saying I didn't give Oregon a chance or that no one is giving Oregon a chance. I know respectable people who are picking Oregon. J.D. Pickell is picking Oregon. This probably won't be as one-sided of a betted game as last year's Cotton Bowl when everyone and their mother was on Ohio State to win and cover, and they did. It happens. Do not be shocked if Oregon outright wins and covers IU minus 3.5 or 4.5. They're a good team. It's really hard to beat a good team twice, especially when that team is as talented and as well coached, as disciplined, and as highly power rated as Dan Lanning's Oregon Ducks are. Regardless of that, I'm going with Indiana to win and cover and advance to the national title game. And that is that right there. Now we got to talk about some transfer portal stuff. We'll then get right out of here. After that, let me see if there's any super chats. I think that there were super chats. Yes, there was. Kevin Veldman 9081. Thank you for the $5 super chat. In SIG, we trust Indiana to the finals. Yeah, that's another thing too. I could not help but think about how I think Cignetti's better than Lanning, and I think that Indiana has the better OC and DC here, and they're more engaged. I could not help but think about that. Now, it is hard to beat a good team twice, and I think Oregon's going to be prepared for some things that Indiana wants to do. But I think Indiana's going to win. If Oregon wins, we're going to release a video sometime in the next 48 hours discussing like several reasons why Oregon can win or even should win. I would not be shocked at all. Again, my confidence meter's at a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. Or maybe it should be lower than that because I'm almost treating it like 5 out of 10 is a pick'em, kind of. I'd almost feel like a 4 out of 10 confidence is, I think, 4 out of 10 confidence for me would be talking as if Oregon's the better team, but I think Indiana's going to win type thing. Maybe I'm measuring that wrong. Maybe it's confusing. If a 1 out of 10 means I'm picking IU to win, but just not very confident about it, and that's this, I'm confusing everyone. My apologies. I'm overcomplicating things. I am. Hold on. Okay, guys. So, my apologies. I have a commitment at 5 that I just got texted about. So, we are going all these videos that I wanted to get to that I'm not going to. Um we'll record them later tonight and I'll just get them out to you then. They'll all be like 10-minute segments about the transfer portal for all these different teams. Thankfully, it wasn't in the live cover, so any new viewers joining can understand that, hey, this is just the semifinals preview, in-depth previews. So, yeah. We'll get off right now. Thank you guys for stopping by. Apologies for that abrupt ending, but we've already been live for like what? Yeah, hour 20 minutes. It's probably a good show size today. Tomorrow we'll be live, I think, tomorrow. I'm going to try to be. Won't be promising anything. We'll schedule a time tonight. You'll see it. We'll stick to it. Thank you guys so much for watching,